Thank you all for joining today for the Grounded Giving, How Community-Led Collaboratives Are Driving Impact. Please note, closed captioning is available and can be enabled at the bottom of your Zoom screen. My name is Rebecca Darwent, and I'm a Collaboratives Senior Advisor at Philanthropy Together. Philanthropy Together is a global initiative to grow and strengthen the field of collective giving with programming just like We Give Summit. Today, we are so excited to discuss the power of community-led philanthropy. Throughout today's session, please engage with us in the chat, and you can even start now. Let us know on a scale of 1 to 10 how you're doing. Drop it in the chat and keep us posted. We also encourage you to share your feedback following this session by completing a very quick 2-question poll. Before we get started, I want to let you know also that we're doing a random drawing of one attendee who is right here, right now, and that person will receive a book of their choice from one of this year's speakers. The winner will be announced at the end of the session, so stay tuned to see if you'll be selected. With that, let's jump into the session. All right, so I want to start out by saying that as a co-founder of the Foundation for Black Communities, I've had the joy of being in the front row seat of a rapid expansion of the community-led collaboratives movement since 2020. Collaboratives are gaining lots of momentum, and research shows that these funds are very different from institutional philanthropy. In this session, we're going to explore how community-led collaboratives are leading this change. This model centers community-led decisions, and that happens at all levels of the organization, from governance to operations to partnerships. Community-led collaboratives have a special secret sauce that we're going to reveal in this session, with also a focus on how we can ensure this field is sustainable, how to engage with donors, and ensure that our practices have greater impact. And I'm most excited to do this with powerhouse colleagues at the Emergent Fund. The future is not created. The future is co-created. We believe in this sentiment from business thinker Neil Merchant so deeply in this work. Setting the context as we've been having these conversations over the last few hours and decades in the sector, we know that the philanthropic sector is changing. There's been a push for trust-based philanthropy, a greater call for equity, justice, and systems change from a sector that has largely been monolithic. Worldwide, the call to action is to shift power and move away from top-down approaches. We're looking at decolonizing this movement, and the critique of philanthropy at times has been very pointed. This is happening at the same time that we're seeing converging and intersecting crises around the world. You know, there's a new buzzword to describe it, polycrisis. We all feel these things intimately in our lives. And while we're facing interconnected problems, we require interconnected solutions. And that's where collaboratives really come in. So for decades, there's been a growth in moving philanthropy to more community-led, participatory, and people-powered solutions. We've seen this with the fast rise of community foundations, women's funds, and giving circles that show us the power and potential of this shift. Collaboratives really build on this trend and push it even further. The collaboratives movement has been growing steadily globally, and there's a big opportunity to scale and strengthen them and elevate their profile to bring in more donors and more dollars. A recent study done by Bridgespan in late 2021 showed that collaboratives vary in size and shape. It's a growing movement with 400 funds and counting, and they're moving big dollars. The survey found that the survey respondents granted $2 to $3 billion in 2020 alone. And with minimal additional staff, that number could grow to 15 billion. The potential is truly limitless. And when we look at these funds, they look different. Collaboratives can be community-led. For example, Natives Voices Rising supports grants to Native-led organizations. They can be local, like the Hawaii People's Fund, which supports the work of Hawaii-based organizations and grassroots challenging systems of oppression. Some are global, like Klima Fund, which supports grassroots movements to cool the planet and build resilience around the globe. Some are issue focused, like the Equality Fund, which funds feminist movements. And we have inclusive collaboratives like Red Umbrella Fund, which is upholding the self-determination of sex workers of all genders. And some are very large, like Co-Impact. In 5 short years, this fund has moved $685 million. You read that right. So what are some of the key characteristics that we see of collaborative funds? First, they are pooled funds, and this means that the funding is coming from multiple sources. Maybe it's individual donors, foundations, governments, even corporations. Collaboratives as a sector has very diverse leadership in contrast to traditional philanthropy. And these leaders are naming racial equity as a priority. It's non-negotiable. Another characteristic is that oftentimes these have very lean teams, smaller staff teams with a handful of paid staff working very closely with advisory boards and committees. They're also networked. So these collaboratives are building on networks of networks across their boards, across their advisories, grant partners, systems partners. And the beautiful thing is that all players have leverage and contributions to the overall system and the larger ecosystem. And the priority here is that they're working collaboratively. Systems change is a big identifier of collaboratives. They're often working at the intersection of multiple issue areas and can see from a bird's eye view across geography as well. And they are looking at research, policy, and direct action. And as I said before, the scale of collaboratives, the potential is really limitless because there's such an ability to grow rapidly. And when we look at community-led collaboratives, a community-led collaborative is a collaborative that centers decision-making and priority setting in the hands of proximate leaders. Here, community-led collaboratives are really the bridge between people who want to do good with their money and the people on the ground with the experience to do it. Now, there's a spectrum of community-led approaches, including advisory committees and board members from community, having operational staff from community, using community nominations process, participatory grant making, and so much more. And in this aspect, we see communities that were once completely left out being leaders. And that means communities themselves are setting the priorities and making decisions, particularly about funding allocations rather than donors. For example, at Right Relations Collaborative, Indigenous peoples are making decisions, or the Black Feminist Fund, where Black feminists are making the decisions, and Resourcing Refugee Leadership Initiative, where refugees are making the decisions. In community-led collaboratives, lived experience, professional experience, qualitative research, place-based learning, oral histories are all prioritized and centered. And when we look at the disruption that I had talked about that's happening in philanthropy, a lot of people are hearing the call to action for donors to shift power, and many people are asking, well, how do we do this? And community-led collaboratives are really offering a solution. They're inviting donors and foundations to join the movement in 3 ways. Having mindsets that champions the strength of the collective, using trust and abundance in that mindset, and using behaviors of funding operationally, multi-year, and relationally, and taking action that promotes community-led priority setting, decision-making, and funding. Donors really have an exciting opportunity to ensure the sustainability of community-led collaboratives and this emerging movement as it unfolds. So the secret sauce of the community-led approach is that these communities, like I said, that were once left out, are leading. They're using their inclusive and diverse approaches as laboratories of democracy and power sharing. Their ecosystem of grant partners, donors, sector colleagues allows them to work in a relational and networked way, mobilizing many players in the system. And they have the ability to leverage this in a really, really exciting way. So it's my pleasure to take these high-level concepts and bring them down to the ground with the help of an incredible community-led collaborative of Emergent Fund. I am delighted to be joined by both Alicia and Angela, who bring decades of experience doing movement and organizing to this community-led collaborative. They have seriously impressive bios, which can be found on the We Give Summit site. Please check it out. And for now, I'll jump into the conversation with Emergent Fund, which resources rapid response and emergent organizing led by frontline Black, Indigenous, and people of color with trust-based, no strings attached grants. And so with that, welcome. All right. So I want to kick us off with a first question, and I'll hand it over to you, Alicia. How do you define community-led?
Well, first of all, Rebecca, thank you so much for just grounding us in like the spirit of community-led funds and collaborative funds. It was actually really powerful to hear you lift up all of our like comrades in this work and to really give people the secret sauce right at the beginning. I was like, well, I guess that we could just go home because you already gave everyone the cat is out of the bag, as we say. We're just so thrilled to be here with y'all. And I'm buzzing from just like a lot of joy and a lot of affirmation in the chat box. So I'll just say just maybe a quick bit about Emergent Fund, first of all, is that we are really a home for what we see as visionary intersectional work that's aimed at transformation, at collaboration, at systemic change, and at creating new solutions. You are looking at 100% of the Emergent Fund team. So when you talked about small, funds who are doing a lot with really small teams, I was like, yeah, that sounds a lot like us. We're a queer, women of color, movement accountable, rapid response fund. And so all of the work that we're doing is really, I think, world building. So we're trying to invest in rapid response and emergent strategy, not in emergencies themselves. And so we know that movements, all of the movements that both Angela and myself that we come from and the folks who make up our advisory council and our nominations network, we know that our movements really rely on creative and collective responses to crisis as strategic opportunities for visionary organizing. And that is like the place where Emergent Fund's work lives. And so what I'll say about how we define the community-led, and then maybe I'll, open up space too for you, Angela, to talk more is, really what we hear from both sex worker organizing and disability justice, which is nothing about us without us. We see community-led as a combination of like people who have lived experience plus some political education who are really leading this work. I think for Emergent Fund, what guides our work is that we have people from the communities that we're in solidarity with across all levels of our decision making. And so that includes your two staff at Emergent Fund who come from organizing, who come from impacted communities, and also the decision makers who are helping us through our participatory grant making model. Those folks also come from organizing in proximate communities. And then we try to maintain a feedback loop from our grantees as well. So we have direct input from grantees in addition to our advisory council and our nominations network, which also includes grantees. So in like every way, Emergent Fund is really by and for community. We were created in 2016 by a group of organizers and women of color in philanthropy who really saw like the necessity for a shift and for rapid response funding as an essential power building tool. And we've really maintained that ethos and value of having people of color, Black folks, Indigenous folks, and folks of color, and people closest to issues, really designing the solutions for our work. I'll stop there, and maybe Angela, if there's anything that I missed.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, y'all. I'm Angela. I use she, she, them pronouns. Yeah, and actually, as I was thinking, the timing of today, we just like launched like May Day and also the beginning of Asian Pacific Islander Native Hawaiian History Month. And I just like felt called to bring in Grace Lee Boggs. She has a quote like a revolution that is based on people exercising their creativity in the midst of devastation is one of the greatest historical contributions of humankind. And I really feel like her guidance in our work, rapid response and emergent organizing is neither new or niche. I think at the heart of what we see our work is communities who are exercising not just creativity, but the power of self-determination under crisis, but also under political opportunities to shape the world and move people, meeting them where they're at, meeting survival needs, but then also simultaneously bridging and bringing people towards a vision for a world where we're not just surviving, we're also thriving. And so I just wanted to name that. And I think we're really blessed to have deep community. And I think maybe as organizers, because a core tenet is nothing about us without us, and some levels it feels a little bit intuitive. It's like, how do you explain to someone tying a shoelace when it's like a muscle memory that's been there with you? And I think it's really humbling. Even like today, we in addition have our like multiple layers of direct power and accountability. We have our guiding advisory council who directly lead on our grant making. And it's astounding that we have these really incredible, very busy movement, like movers and shakers, and we convene them each and every month. Which is an incredible pace. And they review each like hand by hand, sometimes upwards of 100, sometimes more proposals each month that come before them. And then on top of that, we also have a very broad network of nominations network, who are also organizers who are a little bit at a distance from our grant making, but they get full way in and they get to see our list of proposals. These are folks who are like directly on the front lines, whereas our advisory council has a little bit of spaciousness. Just because movement dynamics of funding can be really complicated. But then in addition, we are very accessible. People are frequently on calls with both Alicia and myself together. We're on calls with our current grantees for feedback, but also for our applicants and including applicants who don't get funded. And so I think that we're so nimble that we're able to integrate our feedback in real time. So really like community is quite broad in terms of like how they're able to shape our work in real time.
That's incredible. I think you've already started to drop so many seeds of what makes your model so powerful. I'm wondering if you could give us a bit of an overview of decision making at Emergent Fund and how do you approach your grants and working with partners?
Do you want to start on that, or can I start, Angela? Yeah, I'll start. So how do we just approach decision making? I mean, I think Angela's already laid out a big part of how we approach decision making, which is that it is collective. So we do consensus-based decision making with our advisory council every single month. I think it's really important to know that Emergent Fund is one of the few open, accessible, no strings attached rapid response funds in the US. We're really powered by a deep trust of organizers and collective liberation. And so when we think about our work as like a practice in reparations and land back, which is how we see our work politically, we think that the decision making should then reflect that our decision making should be reflected in who's actually making decisions about the work and where resources are flowing out of the hands of extractive institutions and back into the hands of our people. And so with that, I just want to say that sometimes participatory grant making, it's a really powerful tool, but it's not inherently liberatory in and of itself, right? It's not necessarily like a clear-cut checklist. And taking direct leadership from communities shouldn't necessarily be conflated with tokenism, right? And so we have to be clear in our own work about who is holding power, who is holding resources, and how that power is exercised. And I think in Emergent Fund, because we come from community, we are also now in the philanthropic institution, in an institution, right? So we have to really be mindful ourselves of how we're like maintaining bureaucracy, and how, how we get like bought in to some of these like white supremacist work culture values. And so we try to really practice having a lot of feedback, consensus-based decision making, hearing from our grantees, and also hearing from our nominations network. We have people at every level helping us make the decisions. And also we have deep accountability, right? So I think accountability is a really important part of our model. It's like we also report back. Our stakeholders aren't just our donors or funders, right? Our primary stakeholder, we are accountable to movement first, right? And so in all of our work, we are going back to community and saying like, did this work for you? We're constantly, we are experimental ourselves. Emergent Fund is really like a practice and emergent strategy ourselves. And so we want to be iterative. We want to hear hard feedback about our work. And we want to shift power and practice so that our communities are getting their needs met. And like Angela said, moving from like crisis and survival into thriving and liberation.
That's beautiful. I'm wondering if there's a way that you could double click maybe by giving an example. Sorry, my words are fumbling a little bit, but by giving an example of that accountability mechanism, being such a nimble team, how were you, maybe set this context for a little, and then help us understand how you were able to change your practice or be nimble and responsive, specifically in accountability to movement leaders.
Oh my God, I have an example immediately because it happened last week. So
Let's
great.
do it.
Happy we're here. I can go real world with you.
Yes.
Yeah, we got feedback from a grantee recently that our timeline was unclear, our rapid response timeline was unclear. And maybe not as, we move money, just for folks on the call, we move money in about a week, sometimes less than a week, depending on when folks apply. If you apply on a weekend, like it could take longer, we do grant making once a month. So we meet with our advisory council once a month, and I won't go into too many of like the nitty gritty details because I think we're going to keep it pretty like top line here. But even with that, even as quickly as we move, our grantee gave us feedback that, and this is a person who we've funded in the past for other rapid response organizing, and that grantee said, hey, like, this is taking way too long, and I have community that I am accountable to as the ED of an organization, and I need y'all to be on time. And so there were many, like kind of layers of places where, we were out of the office because we're a team of two and also deserve rest. And so,
Yes.
it's kind of like we're holding both of those things, but also, like just getting them the resources took longer than either we or they had expected. And so we took their feedback and immediately worked with our fiscal sponsor and our grants management team to make sure not only that we were moving more quickly, but also that we were giving a lot of clarity to folks when they apply about how long the process takes. So you can expect when you, if you have been approved for a grant from Emergent Fund, that a check will take about 3 days. You can expect that when you get, if you do ACH, it takes longer. It takes about 7 days, right? So now there's just like a little more clarity. And this literally happened like 2 weeks ago. And again, we were founded in 2016. So even now we're still trying to figure out ways to iterate. I'll maybe share one other story, which is that we didn't fund a grantee that we've funded for rapid response organizing in the past. And we reached out to them and said, hey, we didn't fund you this time because we had 100 people, 100 organizations in our pool, and some other stuff rose to the top, but we want to invite you back, and we want you to know, and we want to make this as easeful as possible for you. So, let's talk about how we can support you, and just like doing a one-click reapply, so that you don't have to spend your organizing energy applying over and over again to our fund or any other places. And so we really try to be as efficient with grantees time, because we know that the things that they're doing on the front line are the most important things. And like, these are organizations who may or may not have development staff, right? Like they don't have a development person. They don't have time to like spend on proposals. So we keep our proposals short, like 500 words, and we don't require any final reporting because we trust our people, right? We know that when money goes into the hands of organizers, it goes to the right place, whatever they're doing with it. And so, so we really try to make it as low barrier as possible. I hope that's helpful, like
Definitely.
a helpful example.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I have like just like a quick addition to that. Collaboration really is what is efficient, and when you move with very little ego, we're able to move incredibly fast and together. And I think like where we see some of that too is like either through advisory council who have a direct pulse to the front lines. You know, everyone's paying attention to the news cycle or to events or what's happening in their community, and we're able to be directly connected to groups and to proactively offer rapid response dollars in hand with minimal burden or application. So when that happens, of course, organizers are often like taken back and, you know, pleasantly surprised. It's a very different muscle. But then in addition, the platform that we use, Just Fund, is also full of proposals, and we're also keeping an eye in there. So sometimes there will be times where we will be in there and also looking for work to fund with no active application in addition to our ongoing monthly open call. And then there are also times where our peers need help or we need help. So, you know, we during the early, right after the SCOTUS decision around Dobbs came down, there was a young feminist, indigenous-led repro justice group that was the only one on Guam, and we were their seed funder, but they were sort of up in the air a little bit around their fiscal sponsor. It came through, but when we're in the in-between stage, we partnered with one of our friends, Emergent Fund, and we are open to also moving money to our peers who can reach where we might not be able to reach. We are also that way. People frequently do that for us as well. And so we're just able to really decenter our ego and center the needs of our organizers and meeting them in real time when they need us.
It's so refreshing to hear. You know, I think especially with a lens of how traditional foundations operate, it's so counterintuitive. And it's really refreshing to hear how impactful it can be when you have little ego and are truly working collaboratively. I think there's the words that might be on a website and then what it looks like in action. I appreciate you both really uplifting what it looks like in action. I'm wondering, there's a question in the chat that I just want to uplift and kind of segue us into some of the sustainability of Emergent Fund and how you look for resources. And the question is a limit right now the amount of funding you have to grant such incredible work?
Should I start this one too, Angela? I'll start it, Angela, you jump in then. Okay. Yeah, the limit is always, here's what I'll say about this. Like we have a lot of creativity. I'm so sorry, that's me. I'm gonna block this right now. Apologies. Of course, my mom is calling me. We are, it's no doubt, right? Like this part of the sector, particularly collaborative funds, intermediary funds, small grassroots community-led funds, are led primarily by queer and trans folks of color, right? Gender marginalized folks who come from organizing and community. And so because there's very little ego and high emphasis on just getting organizers' needs met, there's a lot of deep collaboration. So I'll say that, like, yes, there's a limit of money, but we know that the money is out there, right? We know that the resources exist to move to our communities. And right now we joke that mutual aid for us looks like us just sending back the same like $40,000 between like 5 different intermediary collaborative funds. And so, yeah, there's a limit in the amount of resources that we can move, but you should know that we see 100 proposals per month, right? And we could probably fund 90 of them. And many of the groups we fund, because they are organizers who are always paying attention to the pulse of movement, can always find a reason to use rapid response funds to pivot to like use a rapid response moment as a moment to bring people in and transform crisis into change, right? And so there are folks that we could actually see coming back to us every single month if, you know, if we had the capacity to resource them in that way. The other thing I'll say is that I think that often it's definitely gendered and racialized, that rapid response work, both from a movement organizing side, but also from a philanthropic organizing side, is often deeply divested from. And so what we see is that people think of rapid response as kind of a throwaway tactic, right? They think of rapid response as reactionary. And what we know is that rapid response is actually it's not reactionary, right? It's actually world building. It is actually a really smart tool in a long arc of organizing. And so I think that there's like kind of a backlash around rapid response. We saw a deep investment in rapid response in 2016. After the election, we saw another investment in rapid response in 2020. And then we have seen kind of a divestment from rapid response. And I think that there's, in some ways it does feel counterintuitive, because what we're telling funders too is like, fund multi-year grants, fund abundantly and across the years, right? Like what we're in this moment took many, many generations to get into. Like people will not survive on 2-year grants, right? You have to invest generationally, right? And so we deeply believe that. And we understand that like there are very few funders who are completely open, completely accessible, can pivot as quickly as we can be as nimble as we can, and can move resources in less than a week, right? And grantees need both, right? Both strategies are going to get us across this. And so so it's really important that rapid response exists. And I think that there's both like a funding gap in the way that funders and donors invest in rapid response grant making and organizing. And I think there's also maybe like just like a communication gap, for lack of a better term. Like there's some more political education that could be happening in donor organizing that could be happening around the importance of the transformational importance of rapid response organizing and the infrastructure, the philanthropic infrastructure that makes that happen, that supports that in happening.
Totally. Angela, I don't know if there's anything you want to add around maybe tackling the same question, but from a different angle. What do you just wish donors understood about your work?
I mean, I would, if I had a highlighter on me, I would definitely underscore everything Alicia has said, because really if we're talking about philanthropy that is serious about social change, we really need to understand what we're up against. And part of that is this ginormous, well-funded, oiled machine that is funding this counter backlash, and understanding that rapid response and emergent organizing go hand in hand with a long arc, consistent dollars for our orgs. I think the other piece too is, since we're on a call, and I just based from the chat, I feel like everybody here gets it, but just like to emphasize, sometimes, we get cold calls, like, tell us what you do, how do you do it? It's like, participatory grant making is really powerful, but it's not inherently liberatory. And I think that sometimes folks sort of think that participatory grant making is, where you have the same people who run all of philanthropy holding the reins of the power, but now you have a team that you can consult. Maybe they can tell you like how to like allocate your dollars. And we're just like super very clear about like lines of direct accountability for frontline directly impacted folks, and how that is operationalized across our entire org, our 2-people team. Sorry. But also just being really clear that sometimes I think where I can see this manifest in practice, sometimes unskillfully, is tokenism, and just thinking about like that too as a form of way how philanthropy participates in harm against our communities, and those are not a one-for-one. So I guess that's the other side of that.
And maybe if I could just add in, thank you for sharing that, Angela. What you shared just reminded me of something else that Angela and I often talk about, which is that when we think about like how our work happens, so much of this work that's like led by particularly Black women and femmes and gender marginalized people is like built on like the same tenets as organizing, right? So mutual care, relationship building, right? And I feel like sometimes those things that are like traditionally maybe gendered or racialized are really undervalued by philanthropy. And so there's this way in which, as an intermediary, we feel ourselves both shifting the field through like political education for the philanthropic sector and hoping that that will move donors and funders, not just to fund Emergent Fund, but to fund movement like they want us to win, right? But also, I think that in some ways we also buffer our grantees from the harmful like experiences of philanthropy in many ways, right? So they can come to a 2 queer women of color team who gets organizing, who's been where they've been, right? Like I was ED of a 90,000 when I started. Our org was $90,000. The grassroots organization that I was in before Emergent Fund, right? We know what it's like, Angela and I know what it's like to be really scrappy. I feel like we know what it's like even at Emergent Fund to be really scrappy. And so in some ways we're like trying to protect grantees from the harm of philanthropy. And in some ways we act as like a bridge to the rest of philanthropy because we're seeing grantees that traditional and mainstream and larger funders may not ever see, right? May not ever fund because they're not scaled enough, because they're outside of certain priorities, right? Because their work is really seen as risky. And I'm using quotes, air quotes, when I say risky, because we understand that resourcing the leadership and organizing of Black folks and Indigenous folks and folks of color is not at all risky, right? Because this is the work that we have been doing generationally without funding, right? So it is not a risk to resource our communities, right? It is actually smart if you want to if you want to survive this moment, to fund us, right? But we see that funders often see some of the work that we're resourcing as too risky because of either who the organizers are, particularly like Black trans folks, sex workers, Indigenous folks, or because of the type of work that it is, like abolitionist organizing, for example. And so we really see that like as an important part of our understanding of our work is really to stand in the gap for grantees between ourselves and like the harmful aspects of philanthropy.
I just want to like chime in just because we're talking about risk. Someone mentioned generational investment for the context of the chat box. Yes, love that. I will push back when I see that term pop up in philanthropy. You know, those of us in philanthropy, we really have a higher calling to reparations and also like returning the wealth, restoring, repairing relationships. And I think many in our field really often act as if they're making an investment. They're thinking about risk. They're like seeking out a return on investment. Our understanding at Emergent Fund and for our peers is that all wealth is built on the backs of Black and Brown folks with stolen land, stolen lives, and stolen labor. And it is not philanthropy's money. It's our money. It's the money of Black and Brown folks. And so we really see our work within the philanthropic sector under the lens of returning wealth that is rightfully ours. So we're not here to like make investments. We're here to like bring money home.
Thank you so much for that. I want to just call out to folks in the audience. Please put any questions that you have. I know that lots of questions have come in already. This is the time we're going to be closing out soon, and I want to make sure that any direct questions from the audience that we have a chance to uplift them. The conversation has been so powerful, and so don't want anybody to miss the opportunity to ask the question now. So much bridge building, right? Like being bridges, and that is one of the pieces of the secret sauce of community-led collaboratives in particular, is the types of bridges that you can actually build. They're bridges that folks can walk across and actually get to the other side. Let's see. Yeah, this is an interesting question in the chat. How do new organizations fare with these donors? We're only just over a year old and have been denied time after time. And I think that what I'm hearing from the conversation as it's unfolded is that Emergent is often first donor, first partner for a lot of these movement leaders. Can you share a little bit more?
Sure, what I'll share. Thank you, Reverend Dr. Sandy, for sharing that question. And yeah, that's something that we hear a lot with our grantees, particularly the smaller grantees, particularly grantees without a ton of infrastructure, that it just takes a long time to get in the good graces of traditional philanthropy. I would say that for Emergent Fund, what we often try to do with the folks that the grantees that we're in community with, we kind of have an open door policy with grantees. So not kind of, we totally have an open door policy with grantees, which is a little unwieldy when you have funded about 500 to 600 organizations in our time since we started, and just like 300 just last year. And so what we try to do is connect grantees first to our peer funders. So other intermediary funds who perhaps are not rapid response, who perhaps, even if they're offering small multi-year grants, are at least offering multi-year grants to folks. So we'll try to connect grantees within our network to other funders who are also within our network, folks whose work we understand, whose priorities we understand. I have helped grantees craft proposals. We literally had a call this morning where we helped a grantee brainstorm other funders to talk to. We spend a lot of our time acting as like network weavers and connectors within this ecosystem. Like, it doesn't make sense for me to be in this role unless I'm bringing my people with me. Like, what else am I going to do with my time besides like move more money to movement and like bring folks along? And so we spend a lot of our time connecting folks. Happy, Dr. Sandy, to talk a little bit more about this. Like, feel free to like reach out, but it's hard. It's hard for grantees. It's hard for like, as folks are trying to form their own organizations, to have access to these kinds of funders. So happy to think more about it with you.
That's beautiful. I wonder if there's any other examples of kind of going beyond the dollar, because that having that open door policy and really being thought partners and door openers is a huge piece of what collaboratives and community-led collaboratives take the time to do, like you have. Are there other ways that really show up in your work?
Yeah, I would say that we tried to, so in response to the Dobbs decision, we also did some capacity building for grantees. So we worked with a firm called Vision Change Win to do some safety and security training for organizers on the front lines of reproductive justice movements. We've also worked with grantees to find collaborations across with each other, right? We do a lot of this ad hoc because we're a small team. We're trying to really figure out how to like really institutionalize some of this capacity building. I remember one of my favorite examples of this is that we had a grantee who reached out to us who's doing some like abolitionist and no new jails campaign work in South Florida. And he was like, I saw on your website that you're funding all of these other campaigns in other places in the country. Can you just put us on a thread together so we can share stories? And I was like, oh, like, why didn't I think of that? Right. But we were able to put, no new jails, South Florida with New York, with DC, with Seattle, with Oakland, with Louisiana, right? Prison Parish Project, we were able to connect folks to do their work. So I think that there's a lot of connecting that we do in a really kind of informal fashion that I would love to see us do a little more institutionalizing of.
Beautiful. We're rapidly getting towards the closing part of this conversation, which is wild. I don't think that an hour is going to do justice to your work at all, but I'm wondering if you could share what continues to inspire you, or how you see the collaboratives and community-led collaborative space evolving. One of those two.
I definitely want Alicia to have the last word, but I do think that an area that I get really excited about is like, I think philanthropy forgets and often is overconfident in its power over grantees, but we're also seeing organizers starting to lean into their power, because philanthropy wouldn't also exist or have a case for themselves, for ourselves, without them. And so I think where I'm seeing some exciting growth is organizers also organizing to be like, I won't work with this funder because of how they've treated us in the past and how extractive or transactional. And there's been some collective work around that I think is tremendously exciting. And it also gives me hope, because I think that for some of our peers too, I just want to name like how manufactured scarcity is, and we see
Mhm.
at some level with our government always like no money for our kids, no money to keep them safe, but plenty of money for guns, plenty of money for corporations. I think when it comes to movement building and power building and frontline work that's for our communities, we're often expected to be grateful for pennies or even fractions of pennies, when also like it's very common for Alicia and I to be on calls and someone will pitch back this type of work or be curious about how to do this work, and we'll have fundraised millions of dollars. So we know that money is out there. We know dollars are languishing like in endowments and foundations. And I think that there's just so much work that we could be doing and is happening in real time to organize our peers like this in real time. We're doing it together. But yeah, I'll pass it to Alicia. What's giving you hope?
Mhm.
That's giving me hope. Yeah, there's so much giving me hope. I think what's giving me hope right now is this kind of shift in the tide. I talked a little bit about the divestment and philanthropy, but I feel like there is a lot more. I'm just seeing in my short time, and this is my first role in philanthropy. But in my short time in philanthropy, I'm like, oh, okay. I'm seeing particularly like queer and trans folks of color who are coming from movement into philanthropy to like shift philanthropy and really push philanthropy forward in ways that are just incredibly powerful and like really bring in people's deep organizing skills. And so I'm seeing I'm seeing a future where our communities are funded abundantly, and that gives me hope. I'm seeing a future where like Black folks, Indigenous folks, and folks of color are have the resources that they need to thrive. I'm seeing a world where rapid response will probably, there will always be something to organize. We will always need organizing, but I'm like seeing a future where I have a 2-year-old, so I'm always seeing a future that they are in. I'm always seeing a future where my child is in it, but I'm seeing a future where our lives are not like at constant threat. And I think that y'all on this call and like organizers on the front line, like if we work together, I like truly have hope that we will. Some days I don't have hope, but today I think it's you. I have hope today because of you that we will get there. Yeah. Yep.
A rapid round of applause, everybody. Thank you in the audience. If you could please just, come off camera, show your gratitude. This has been an incredible conversation. I know that there's a lot of friends and leaders and just people who are joining you with that hope and inspiration. Thank you so much. To Alicia and Angela, we appreciate all of your valuable insights. I mean, what an incredible session. This will be available for folks to listen to after, because there was gem after gem after gem. And there's so much lessons that we can continue to apply in our work. So thank you so much deeply. I come with humble respect and gratitude for your work. Before we wrap up, I just want to remind everyone to answer the 2-question poll before exiting the meeting. The poll just launched. Also, in the next few days, I've already said it, but you're gonna find the recording of today's conversation and all of the conversations across We Give Summit. Shout out to Esteban Iajoso, apologies for pronunciation. You are the winner of a book, so our team will follow up with you via email to confirm the book of your choice and your mailing details. That's a huge part of how we continue to nourish ourselves, is staying connected to this work. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at subsequent sessions. We want to spotlight one that's happening tomorrow, Stronger from Our Differences, Learning from One Another. It's another session that is on the collaboratives track, so we look forward to seeing you there. And today, our next session is Bold Inclusion, including neurodiverse participants in your giving circles. And it's starting at 5 Eastern Time, 2 p.m. Pacific Time. So we will see you there. Again, a tremendous thank you. It's just been amazing to be in community with you today.